sweethearts. So, okay. So we think we're here together, a little time to think, listen to, analyze, contemplate. And if we choose to internalize and practice this advice, this is advice from the Buddha coming through our Tibetan lamas on how to develop these outrageous levels of compassion for sentient beings. So we just think, do our little prayer, do that nice prayer that you do. There's a particular prayer you do, I think, isn't there? Yeah. That's the one.
To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge.
Okay. So it's just, okay, make an mandala offering, sure.
This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Iram Guru Rana Mandala Kamniyatayami.
Okay, so let's just summarize. Oh, I sort of did that already the first time. I said it the first time. That's enough. Okay, so let's summarize. I think the first talk we had, I really was trying to stress the work that we need to do to prepare us to even be able to understand the compassion of the Bodhisattva path. And that is, we've got to do the wisdom wing. We've got to do the junior school and high school, the first and second scopes, As Prabhupada Rinpoche says, the teachings of Bodhicitta, you've got to be a suitable vessel, meaning you've got to have done the work already. And I always repeat this continuously, but it's like, if any body of knowledge, perfectly well, if you've got to get to the university level, you can't just leap there. You've got to do junior school and high school. Well, this is exactly here. All the teachings we share with the Theravada teachings, all the teachings we share with the Hinayana path, which is all about karma and the mind, that's all the nuts and bolts of Lord Buddha's teachings about how things exist, the Four Noble Truths, basically. That's the Hinayana teachings. That's the first level of practice. So without understanding what suffering is, one's own, without understanding the causes of that suffering, without wanting to get out of that suffering, be revolted by suffering, be sick of suffering, which is renunciation, we can't possibly understand. We can't possibly even understand the meaning of the level of compassion that they're talking about on the Bodhisattva path. Because the simple reason is the compassion we have now is only for the first kind of suffering. Buddha talks about 3 kinds of suffering: suffering of suffering, suffering of change, and all pervasive suffering. So we don't discuss this, I mean, the first kind of suffering is very obvious. It's when the bad things happen. That's the level of compassion. They're the people we have compassion for, when bad things happen. But even narrower than that, they've got to be victims. They've got to be innocent victims. So it's like I always joke and say we have compassion for a few children and a few animals. That's about it, because our view is very limited. Why? Is because we have this, it's inbuilt in our mind is probably the view of the philosophical materialist view that we didn't ask to get born, that, we all come from our mother and father. In other words, there's no concept of reincarnation. And without the view of reincarnation and without the view of karma, there's no way to understand why people suffer. Therefore, there's no way to understand why people harm others. So the view we have is that we're a bunch of innocent victims, and some people are naughty and some bad things happen. So that's kind of limited. So if we have the view from the Four Noble Truths, and which brings in the view of karma, which brings in the view of reincarnation, and which then we understand why people suffer, because they caused it themselves in the past, and we understand why others cause them suffering, because they were suffering in the past too. And then we are able to have compassion for everybody. And that's just for the first kind of suffering. Then we've got the more subtle one, which we really need to understand, and this is understanding attachment. I mean, Lama Yeshe says, I can tell you about attachment for a whole year. We'll never begin to understand it. I mean, this entire samsara is the actual product of attachment over eons of lifetimes. The very fact that we're born as these, with 5 senses, and we live in a world of the 5 sense objects. This is the product. It's like karmic evolution of attachment. It's not just you like chocolate cakes. It's way more primordial than that. So understanding the Four Noble Truths gives us a sense of the depth of this attachment, and therefore we begin to understand the suffering of change, which is that the happiness we do get from contact with sense objects doesn't last. It's about the best we can know. But then you have compassion for that level of suffering. And then we look at the world and all the happy people and the smiling people, the people you'd never think you'd have compassion for. But now we understand they're suffering from the suffering of change, and we have compassion for them. So it's a very, very, very different view, and you won't understand that on the Mahayana path, the Bodhisattva level of compassion, unless you've done the first stages. And that's what we discussed the first week, the first topic, the first talk we did. Then we get to the explicit teachings on the Mahayana path itself about how to develop these incredible levels of compassion, which culminate in bodhicitta. So I forget what we went through there. I think we started with equanimity, which is the basic teaching, this fundamental view that we get first, which is the basis of all the practices upon which we then grow, that culminate as love and compassion, which then itself culminates in bodhicitta. So I think we went through a little bit of equanimity and those other things. But I have a feeling, did we discuss the 8 verses last week? Or I think I said we discussed the 8 verses today. This is the point now. This is the most radical level of practice, exchanging self for others, making this whole genre of practices and teachings called Lojong, that is really the expertise and is the favorite practices of our great Tibetan lamas, There's 2 methods for achieving bodhicitta. As we know, the 6 causes and 1 effect, and this other one is the one of exchanging self for others. And this is the more radical one, the more dramatic one, the more powerful one. So the essence of this whole practice is expressed in these 8 verses, seemingly very simple little words, I mean, we always think about emptiness being much more difficult, but my sense is bodhicitta is more amazing, more difficult than emptiness, It's so shocking. When we start to look at these 8 verses, you'll understand very clearly. So these 8 verses by Langri Tangpa, this text was coming from, I forget now, one of Atisha's disciples, and Atisha brought these teachings from India, and he received these teachings actually from Selimpa, his lama, in Sumatra, in Indonesia, where the Vajrayana was flourishing way back then, 1000s, 1100s or something. Then he went to Tibet, and these teachings initially were kept secret. It's not just Tantra was kept secret, it was these teachings on how to transform your mind, because they're so opposite to the world. I mean, Milarepa said, whatever the world does, Dharma is opposite. That's it. Dharma is opposite. But this is the most dramatic level. And unless we are suitable vessels, as Bhavangka Rinpoche says, unless we have some comprehension, even theoretically, of the Four Noble Truths and what suffering is and renunciation, we won't understand this. It's so shocking. So the very first verse of these 8 verses, the very first one already is shocking. I've got to analyze it. What it says is something like this. It says, in order to get, this is the words of very curious to us. It says, in order to get the benefit from all sentient beings, from all sentient beings. We would tend to think it should mean for. No, it's got a very particular meaning. In other words, what we're trying to do here, that the author of this text, Langri Tangpa, I mean, already he must be bodhisattva. I mean, these words are so outrageous, so shocking, but aiming for this incredible levels of compassion, to utilize the most intense situations of the world to get compassion. So the fact of the matter is, if you want compassion, if you want to cultivate compassion, think of it this way. This is how they talk about it. What do you need most? Well, you need to have contact with suffering sentient beings. You need to have contact with suffering sentient beings. You need to see suffering. If you can't possibly have compassion, compassion is defined as starting with the thought. When you see suffering, you have empathy. Oh my God, look at that suffering. This is unbearable. But if you never meet suffering people, how is it possible to have compassion? It's not. So then in that sense, they mean in order to get the benefit from all these sentient beings, in other words, to use the suffering sentient beings as the grist for my mill to help me develop compassion, because these great bodhisattvas are attempting to develop these amazing levels, in order to get the benefit from all sentient beings. And the next line says, and this is just like ridiculous, they're crazy, who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel. First of all, a wish-fulfilling jewel is something kind of out of fantasy lands, science fiction, as far as we're concerned. We don't know such a thing, but there used to be such a thing in the previous lifetimes. But if we put there instead $1 million, that's not much money these days, these sentient beings who are more precious to me than $1 million. So we think, what is this man talking about? We don't even comprehend what that means. It's like demented. What is he talking about? What does he mean by that? Well, this is the point. For these beings on the path to bodhicitta, or having accomplished bodhicitta, and you hear this when you hear the Lamas talk, when you hear Lama Zopa teaching, you hear his holiness teaching, you hear the great yogis teaching, it's like too crazy the way they talk about having such compassion. It's hard to imagine. It's as if, when you hear the bodhisattvas teach, it's as if every being on the planet is their precious child. The only time you hear such compassion is a mother for her child, a mother would happily choose her baby than to choose $1 million. But to think that you're trying to have the view, because the next line says, I will hold them as most dear. This is the first verse, and each verse gets more intense. In order to make the most of all these suffering sentient beings who are more precious to me than $1 million, meaning without these suffering sentient beings, it is not possible for me to accomplish bodhicitta. It's not possible. And these beings are kind of these fanatics trying to get bodhicitta. So they're so heartfelt. It's sort of almost impossible to comprehend this, who are more precious to me than $1 million. I will hold them all as most dear. I think it even says all the time. It's like ridiculous. But at least we can have the thought. Now, the next verse says, and I always joke, but I mean it, if you were given this advice by your therapist, you could happily sue them for giving you terrible advice. You listen to this next verse. It says, when you are in the company of others, when you are with other people, see yourself as the lowest of all, and to see others as superior. So, to try and put this in words that we comprehend, that we use psychologically, is really quite difficult. So this is why we need to be a suitable vessel to hear these teachings, because if we hear that out of the blue, meaning we're a normal person, which means victim, which means self-pity, which means attachment, anger, depression, jealousy, and I'm not being sarcastic, this is suffering sentient beings' daily life. If you hear that from that perspective, you're going to say, well, excuse me, mate, I already think I'm the lowest of all. What are you trying to do? Rub my nose in it? We simply don't get the point, because it's an advanced teaching. So we've got to try and comprehend that these teachings called exchanging self for others are literally that. We are trying to literally see all other beings as more precious, more amazing, more marvelous than me, and I'm attempting to dedicate my life to only work for them, because that's what a bodhisattva is. We love to hear about compassion. We love to hear about bodhicitta, but when we spell it out like this, it's really quite shocking to us, you know. There's no equivalent in our psychology. This would be a shocking piece of advice to give somebody. There's no reference point for it. There's no basis for this in our culture. It's just too weird. So how would you apply this in daily life? Because it says all sentient beings. I am the lowest of all. I mean, the words are too heavy for our mind. But if we understand the point behind it, because what bodhicitta is you finally, when you've got bodhicitta, not just a moment of it, not a flash of it, but an actual stable realization from having practiced for God knows how many lifetimes. When you've got bodhicitta, one of the first accomplishments, one of the criteria of having accomplished bodhicitta, the first criterion is that there's no longer the thought of I. This is what would sound like mental illness for us in our psychology, you know. So that's why we've got to understand the reference point. We've got to understand the bigger picture to get what they're talking about here, you know. In the mind of a bodhisattva, there is literally no thought of the I. I mean, they know their I as opposed to you. They're not foolish, but there's, you know, for us, we can see the more and more we understand the path, that the word I is the central player in our head. Everything is in reference to I. And of course, that's utterly all we know. We know some people can be more self-centered than others, but to think that you want to get rid of that utterly is too weird. We're not discussing emptiness here. We're talking conventional teachings. In other words, what would be in the mind of a person who's like that? We think they'd be depressed. No, what's in their mind is joy, fulfillment, happiness, compassion, love for others. They don't need to any longer think about themselves because they've done the first level of practice. They've got renunciation. They've given up attachment and anger and the neuroses. They're already joyful, blissful people. That's the point. When we understand that, they've done the job of fixing up the I, if you like, putting it that way. We think of I all the time because we're still fractured and broken, you know, this fragile sense of a sad, poor me. But when you've fixed up your I conventionally and you're now a blissful, radiant, happy, non-attached, non-angry person, you don't need to bother thinking about I any longer. That's the point. I mean, how marvelous, because you've fixed yourself up, you're done. So this verse is practicing, cultivating, when you're with others, this view. So how would you practice it? What would be the words we would use to make it palatable for us? You know, well, I think it's very good. You know, when you're with others, if, you know, we know if ourselves, listen to our lives, think of our lives. We know we divide, this is the point Buddha's telling us, we divide the world into friends, enemies, and strangers. That's it. The friends are the objects of our attachment. They're our beloveds, you know, the ones we think about all the time, the ones we maybe live with, talk to, see, you know. Then there's the enemies, the ugly ones, the ex-husbands and the mean people, the ugly politicians we don't like and all the people we don't like. Then there's 99.999%, which is the strangers, which is most of the universe. This is how we divide all the world. Everybody does this. It's normal. So when we're with others, what we tend to do, we're always finding fault. It's sort of almost embarrassing to admit it, but we've got to look at this. The very fact that we're this separate person all the time, one of the commonest things we do, and we all know it in the world, is we point fingers. You know, our mothers would tell us that, you know, it's the pot calling the kettle black. We always point fingers. Look at him and look at her and look at that politician and look at him. And if we go to a party or to a group of people, you know, like an event, within 10 minutes, you've already got the people you don't like and you're finding fault, and your old ugly auntie this and your old ugly uncle that, and you've got the people you go to, you prefer to talk to them, and you know, we automatically, because of attachment and aversion, we automatically put people into these categories and we find fault. And then we even find fault with our friends. When we go home, we're going to talk about our best friend to somebody else. We love to point fingers. We love to find fault. So actually, it's this hubris. It's like it's arrogance, isn't it? As if somehow we're not like that. Look at all these people do this, and look at all these people do that, and look at all these blah, blah, blah. So it's an automatic and a natural consequence of having attachment. But therefore, you see, and then because, okay, and then what it becomes is this one of cherishing me most. This is something, I forget if I mentioned this last week, but we know very well, like in the wisdom wing and the nuts and bolts of the renunciation teachings, the main problem is attachment. According to the Four Noble Truths, the main problem in daily life is attachment. It's very specific. But on the compassion wing, they frame it differently. You could argue that it's because of attachment to get what I want, we therefore cherish me more than others. So they, as we know, the lamas, they call it self-cherishing. So the main enemy in the wisdom wing is attachment. We're trying to give up attachment, get renunciation. But the main enemy on the compassion wing is framed as self-cherishing, putting me first. And that's the point, because with bodhicitta, we've made this paradigm shift finally, where others are now in the forefront of our mind. It's a very specific approach to the compassion wing. So this practice, the second verse, is a major way to do that. In other words, when you're with others, you're practicing consciously. In other words, you're praising people. It's very simple. It means you praise somebody, not to them necessarily, but in your mind. So how you'd practice this so-called putting yourself low and putting them up high is my feeling is you'd look at another person, especially if it's people at work, people in the Dharma center, people you don't, especially if you don't like them much, which means you find fault. Well, I think a powerful way to practice this is that you look at that person, especially a person you get annoyed with, you don't like, and you find just one thing about them that's better than you. I mean, a specific quality, a specific characteristic. Maybe they're thinner, maybe their ears are cuter, maybe their hair's a nicer shape. I'm talking simple things here. Maybe they've got nicer feet. I always joke about this when I did Kung Fu, okay? I was into martial arts. I did it before I was a nun, and then when I became a nun, I did it for a couple of years in London when I was about 42 or something. 44 actually. And there were the three, there was me, we were the fanatic students. We went 6 days a week. There was me, a 14-year-old Chinese boy, and this white boy who was 19, and then me. And we were like Mr. Lee's favorite students, the fanatic. We were like the Three Musketeers. And we'd go to 6 classes a week, wherever Mr. Lee taught. And we would go afterwards, because, you know, you don't ever eat before you go to class because you're going to train. And then we go to McDonald's afterwards and eat like six pounds of chips, you know, French fries. And we go to the Kung Fu movies in Chinatown in London, right? This is in London, I remember. So they didn't know I was 44 and a Buddhist nun. I kept that secret. I had hair, and they knew I wasn't 19, but they didn't know I was 44, this old lady, right? So we were these buddies, right? Why am I telling you this? Yeah, because at the class, I remember, I was a nun at the time. I remember Paulette. So Paulette, because when you do martial arts, you've got bare feet, right? Isn't it? You've got bare feet. And I was always very arrogant about my feet. I always thought mine were the best Kung Fu feet on the planet, because I've got very short, fat feet that kind of got equal sized toes. I'm being very ridiculous here, but we all know what I'm talking about, you know? And I thought mine were the best feet on the planet. So what I'd purposely do is I'd always praise Paulette, because she was much better at me, better than Kung Fu than me. She had a higher belt and she was much better. So I'd always praise a particular quality of Paulette that was definitely better than me. Are we communicating here? We've got to see them always find fault. It's so automatic, and we would never even confess it most of the time. But it's to consciously find a quality that's better than you. You know, see, what we think of as that's called low self-esteem. Oh, I'm a creep. No, we're not saying we're a creep. We're simply saying that Paulette has got a better kick than I have. You know, that someone else has got a cuter nose. That person's got a quicker mind. That person knows things better. It's genuinely praising a quality in a person that's better than you. And I think we all can admire people. We can all put a person up. There's nothing wrong with that. We have a mentor. We have people we revere. We're not trying to do the extreme neurotic one. Oh, she's so perfect, I'm terrible. Not like that. Not like that at all, you know. There's this funny sound. Are you all unmuted? Are you all muted? I don't think you are. John's not muted. It says John Bailey twice. How come, John? You're down here as well. And then it says Linda. Are you muted, Linda? Anyway, just mute yourselves, darling. All of you. Anyway, whatever. So anyway, are we communicating? That's a way to bring this down to earth. I mean, to say that I am I'm the lowest of all and everybody else is superior is like too grand, too ridiculous. But make it real and catch your mind every day. We're doing it all the time to politicians. And when we see photos of people, we're automatically, it's so quiet, we don't like to confess to it. It's a very powerful teaching and it's very humbling. So the next verse, it seems to me it sort of goes off into a tangent, but this is what it is. And the next three are like really intense, you know. So the next verse says, basically it says, you know, being alert every second, the minute a delusion arises in your mind, which will harm you and others, you will avert it without delay. So I think this is really quite a profound verse, because the assumption is, it says, remember it says, the moment a delusion arises, the moment an affliction arises. Well, excuse me, people, look at our minds, and do we not agree that somehow afflictions are like our default mode? Worried, anxious, attached, depressed, jealous. We mightn't be monsters, but I mean, they're the default mode. And it's almost like when a virtue arises, we should delight. But the opposite here. So clearly the person who wrote this text is a fairly advanced practitioner. They've completely controlled their mind and they're watching it like a hawk. And the second a naughty thought comes, they grab it and avert it. I mean, wow. So it's a pretty intense, and this is really what daily practice is. This is what practice is, you know. Now, the next three, each gets worse than the other. And these are the really powerful kind of the ones of using difficult situations as your path. This is the point, you know. So this first one, my sense is it's a bit like when you look into the world and it's not close friends. It's like you see the world. And it's this verse, and they're all shocking. You know, this one says, when you hear about, you know, the rare person, the rare, I forget the words, who is evil and suffering, the rare person. Well, I'm sorry, this is 10th century Tibet. We're not talking 21st century United States, you know, do you understand? So, I mean, we know the number of quackos, and the word we would use for an evil person, a person who's evil and suffering, I think the word we'd use is psychopath, okay? I mean, are we communicating here? Use the words we use our language, you know. Now, we know that the world is full of people like this. And unfortunately, with television and computers and news every day and iPads and iPhones, we hear about them all every day. These unbearably suffering, wacko, crazy human beings. And the teaching here is, I will sort of, I forget each piece. What is it? This one is like, as if I'd found a precious treasure. So we've got to understand the logic of that. What is the simple logic? Remember, the basis, the thought behind these entire 8 verses is the yearning to achieve the incredible realizations of bodhicitta so that you can smash self-cherishing, so you can be of benefit to sentient beings. It's such a serious, intense drive in these holy beings, you know. I mean, it's quite profound. It's quite shocking. So then obviously, the difficult situations are the best situations. So the reason you found a precious treasure when you read about the psychopaths, and this is why, unless you can understand the first stages of practice, which is karma and why people suffer, you'll never have even a comprehension of why you should see a psychopath as a precious treasure, like you're mentally ill or something. No, it's because this is the person that when you see them and you know, due to their past karma, they're born in this life with these tendencies, and therefore by harming others, they are causing unbelievable suffering for themselves. This is the basis of the greatest compassion the bodhisattvas have for us. So they're a treasure because it causes us to force our heart to have incredible compassion for these suffering people. Not even discussing the suffering they cause to others. This is the thing that's so intense. You know, this is, for me, I always think of a mother. The only person who has compassion for that mother's junkie kid is the mother. Nobody else can stand that junkie kid. She vomits in the soup, she steals, she lies. The only one who has any compassion is the mother. Why? Because the mother can see that she's harming herself. And this is the key basis of having compassion. The very first level of practice, renunciation, is recognizing that you are suffering and that you are sick of suffering. This is why I like to say, and I've been saying, this first stages of practice, the wisdom wing, the first and second scopes of the lamb rim, are like practicing compassion for yourself. It's the way we'd say it. So now when you see others and there's psychopaths and you feel like you found this precious treasure and they're not rare. It says there back in Tibet in the 10th century, this rare person. Now they're not rare, they're common, you know. People all over the world are out of their brains with pain and suffering. So plenty of precious treasures around. Grist for your mill to increase your compassion. This is the point, you know. So the next one for me is a bit closer to home. It's sort of like at work. When someone when someone accuses you of doing something you didn't do, you take the blame and you give them the victory. Now, this is unbelievably intense. This seems like demented in our world. Absolutely crazy, like you're some kind of weird martyr. And that's the point. If you're still in the victim level and haven't done much work in the first stages of practice, and you've got no renunciation, you're full of misery and self-pity and suffering, because join the universe, and attachment and anger and jealousy and pride, a common way that some people express that suffering is being like a victim, like a martyr. We love to be a martyr, you know. This is not what this is saying. This practice is, again, a powerful way to smash your self-cherishing, to smash your attachment, to smash ego grasping. When you are innocent of something, you apologize and take the blame. You really got to be a suitable vessel to do that practice. So that's why these practices are not absolute, that you put them onto practice every time. It's according to your time, your place, when you're ready, the timing, what you're capable of. But it's a very specific set of practices, you know, on this outrageous bodhisattva path. Take the blame. Give the victory to others. I always tell this story. I heard 25 years ago in Australia, there's some fellow, I can't think of his name, I'll call him John, and he had a party. He was a Buddhist. He had a party, and he was telling people that his brand new BMW got scratched right along the door. So he got new doors. Then the next time, then he suddenly saw the scratches again. So he had to get new doors again. So he thought, what am I going to do? You know, and discovered the wacky guy next door, this old bloke, was scratching his car. So obviously this old bloke must have thought John had done something wrong. And John didn't know what to do. He said, what do you think I should do? You know, to all his friends at the party. They're all Buddhists. And one said, well, I'll do this and sue him and scratch his car. And then my friend George, who was there, said, I'll tell you what Lama Zopa would do. Rinpoche would find out what this guy liked, this next door neighbor, and then buy him a very beautiful, expensive gift, and then give it to him and apologize. Right? John's innocent, by the way. John thought this was a great idea, and he did exactly that. He discovered this old bloke like golf, you know. So he bought him his fancy golf balls, wrapped them beautifully, took them to the fellow's door, knocked on the door, offered him the gift, and apologized for anything he'd done wrong. Of course, he'd done nothing wrong. And this is the interesting point about karma. This is what happens. The kind of karma called experience is similar to the cause, which is the stuff that happens to you. It's not from this life. So clearly, John from 42 lives ago must have harmed this guy. And so the guy is now perceiving that John is doing something wrong now, even though he's innocent. This can happen. People can think you're lying, but you're not lying, you know, because of past karma. So anyway, this old guy got the gift, and John went back into his house, and he was sitting there quite happy. He felt he'd fixed the problem. And this old guy knocked on the door, and he had the gift unwrapped, and he was beaming from ear to ear. And he said, this is the kindest thing anyone has done. He said, everything is forgiven. So it's sort of like it worked, you know. In his case, this worked. John took the blame. He had done nothing wrong. He apologized. And in fact, it healed the whole problem. I mean, you know, you read these outrageous stories. I remember reading about these two particularly mega rich billionaires living on one of those fancy one island off New York somewhere. that started off by the trash can being too far over the edge of the people's property. So 5 years, 10 years later, they're suing each other for hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're doing these ridiculous things, and they're not giving up. That's how these things start, you know. But John took the blame. It's a profound practice, but it's obvious you've got to be powerful to do that. You don't do it like a victim. Oh, yes, it's all my fault. We love to do that. This is a powerful practice. And of course, every time you get ego smashed, you're smashing self-cherishing, you're smashing your attachment, and you're smashing your ego grasping. It's so profound. And in his case, it worked beautifully, you know. But look at the world. I mean, the suffering, the number of people, like people come, you know, consult me, ask questions, and the number of parents, mothers especially, why has my child rejected me? You know, I mean, this is the third one. This is the worst one. This is the one the closest to home. This third one says, and I think it's like the close family, you know, the people I've given my life for. I've sacrificed my life for them, in whom it says, in whom I have great hope. Like it must be your child or something, or your beloved, you know, and they've totally rejected you. And how you're going to see those people? You'll see them as your precious guru. That's the most intense. And that's the one I see so often on our planet. The number of parents who are totally rejected by their children. I think it's almost unbearable suffering, you know, because this is our culture. We love to blame. We love to blame, you know. I mean, one person's just written to me recently. His two daughters have just, you know, her two children have totally rejected her. After the parent died, these two children just rejected the other parent. The number of people it happens for, I can't believe the suffering of that. Even if I think of my sisters, one not talking to me anymore, I can't imagine the pain of it. How can you be happy knowing somebody hates you? It's so painful, you know. It's hard to live your life like that. Is so painful. That's this third, so it's like sixth verse. Each of these is a powerful opportunity, in other words, to smash ego grasping, to smash attachment, to smash self-cherishing. And they're the most intense examples, because if you never have a person who's mean to you, and if you never meet people who are suffering, it is not possible to get compassion. It is impossible. So these are dramatic levels of practice, you know. And of course, we do our best. So any questions about those verses? I covered all that in 40 minutes, so we have plenty of time. Come on. There's 2 more verses to go, but we should discuss these now. This whole approach is quite heavy for our culture. That's why I keep insisting, got to understand the background, the framework, you know, the reference points for it all, which is the earlier stages of practice. So are there any questions? Please, please, please. No? Sarah, did you have a question, darling?
Yeah,
Oh,
sure.
there's Mary. Talk to me, Mary. Go on. Talk to me, Mary.
Oh, I was going to let Sarah go first, Venerable.
Okay, Sarah, talk to me, sweetheart.
Okay, we're talking about giving them the victory.
Well, that's one
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
Where you've been accused of something. Yeah.
I can see where if you were a really, really good Buddhist, you could practice this on the personal level. But in terms of carrying it to its ultimate degree, I don't think that's possible. I mean, if we get
Well,
into
you need
the
to give me,
you
tell
know,
me an example. What you mean by give it? Go into details, Sarah. Give a really clear
okay, yeah.
scenario.
Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
Suppose someone shoots your dog. Your dog's not doing anything, but out
Sure.
of meanness, they shoot your dog. Are you supposed to reward this behavior by taking him a box of candy? Shouldn't you pursue this with the police and at least lodge a
understand.
complaint? I mean, at the legal level, I don't think this is fair or just.
I know, but this is the thing. This is layers and layers and layers and layers of assumptions, aren't there, in what you're saying, Sarah, from the perspective of a lawyer, from a perspective, as you said, of the legal world, from the normal perspective of normal life. What you're saying is the typical way people behave. So we've got to question, we've got to ask the question, what you've got to ask the question, Sarah. We've got to know what is the reason for this. It's a piece of advice at an advanced level in which you're trying to cultivate bodhicitta. So once you understand the benefit of this practice, then you'll be comfortable and you'll know whether you're capable or not. Of course it's possible. Of course it's possible. So from what you've heard, knowing about the Bodhisattva teachings, you've been around for years, you're hearing all these teachings, try and explain this technique. It's a technique, it's a method, it's a piece of advice. When someone accuses you of doing something, so you're saying shoot your dog, can we keep it more direct in relation to you, please? Just keep someone at work thinks, keep it small, Sarah. We don't have to worry about big dramas, like you've been accused of murder. Like on death row, that happens too. I can tell you about some of my friends. But one example, if someone accuses you of lying and you didn't do it, or like John's example, his simple example of his car. So try and explain. You mightn't agree with it, and I don't want you to necessarily, but if you don't understand the logic of it, then there's no point in discussing. So try and understand from the perspective of this path, this level of practice, and that piece of advice. Tell me, explain it to me as if you had to explain the practice to me. Explain it to me. And why would you do it? And what is the benefit? Sarah, what's the benefit to the practitioner? That's the point. So explain it to me. Explain.
Well, the benefit of the practitioner would be to expand your capacity for bodhicitta by smashing self-attachment.
You just answered the question. So where's your worry? Where's your problem? You just answered the question.
My problem is with this flies, I have a high regard for truth, whatever it is.
But that's, Sarah, stop. That's another discussion. This is a specific practice in a specific environment, in a specific situation where someone has accused you of doing something you didn't do. So if you do choose, like John, to take that practice, then it's profound. But it doesn't follow you've got to sit there like some lemming and do it every time and your dog gets killed and, oh, yes, you're a lovely person. That's not like that. You know it's not like that. There are different practices at different times, Sarah. A bodhisattva equally at another time could be accused of something, but they know out of wisdom it's right to completely fight it in the court. You've got to have wisdom, Sarah, to know what to do at what time. It's much more nuanced than you're saying. It's not some absolute technique that you'd use every time. It's not like the technique of a lemming or a victim. It's the John example is a great one. And in the end, it worked. It stopped years of litigation, if you like. I'm just joking, really. So it just depends. It worked for him. His car had been scratched. He apologized to the guy, which is so weird, but look, it worked. Even it worked short term. The guy forgave him, and so it finished. The karma finished. So you've got to have the view of karma. You've got to understand why the guy thinks he did something wrong. And then John, whatever reason, thought it was a good idea, so did it, and it worked. So, we all love that story. It's a lovely story, and you probably even appreciate it as well. But different times, different things. You choose at different times, different things. There are the Tibetans happily demonstrating and have been. The Dalai Lama isn't sitting there smiling at the Chinese for the last 60 years, for God Almighty's sake. He never stops trying to find ways to get freedom, but he's not angry, he's not upset, he's not freaking out. So it doesn't mean be a passive victim and sit there and take rubbish, which is what it sounds like to us. You get my point? I know you understand, darling. Good. Thank you, sweetheart. Yes, Eloise.
So in thinking about mothers whose children reject them,
Yeah.
of course, as a mother myself, yes, we have compassion for our children when they're suffering. And even when they're angry with us or blame us for their problems and I have lots of I have several female friends who are several mother friends whose children are where this situation just seems to prevail, where it's just rejection and blame and and of course as a mother we have compassion, but it seems like to really have compassion, it's hard because they blame you so much that that it's hard to have self-compassion. It's hard not to feel like a victim as a mother. What have I done wrong? Is what always comes up from mothers. What have I done wrong that you know, and so
That's
it's hard enough wondering what you've done wrong and how you failed somehow.
Mhm.
And then you know, your children are continuing to blame you so
Mhm.
having compassion for them, and then while you're working on compassion for yourself, you know,
Well,
I
see,
think that
this is the point. Yeah. What's your name? You're not Eloise. Who are you?
I'm Adrian.
Adrian. So,
Hi.
darling, listen to me. This is my point that I've been trying to show. When we understand that this is a university, this is a college level practice, and that the early stages of practice, like I've been repeating all the time, abiding by the laws of karma, understanding yourself while you're suffering, understanding your mind, getting renunciation. All this is the basis from which you can now understand why the child is rejecting you, because you know it's due to past karma. And all that earlier stages of practice is what really self-compassion is. So for most of us, we're jumping in the deep end with this practice because we're not high advanced practices when our children reject us. We're ordinary human beings struggling. So like you said, it's a really crucial one to understand. It's due to past karma that the child is rejecting you and blaming you. And then it's really important, as you're suggesting, not to use that one brush and paint the whole of yourself with it, because maybe you did nothing wrong, like John did nothing wrong, but he was able to kind of see the crazy guy and take the blame. So it's kind of profound. But with the child one, because it's ongoing, you know, I mean, it's really hard. And this is the tragedy, because we are so, all of us as normal human beings are so hungry for approval from everybody, from our siblings, from our aunties, from our mother, from our partner, and from our children. So if our children adore us, we all assume we must have been a good mother, you know. But it's often just due to the karma of past virtue that a mother and a child love each other and don't have much disharmony. Whereas another case, the mother can be a perfect mother, but the child has got a lot of problems. Their mind is crazy. They're very negative. And due to negative karma from the past, the child always blames the mother. That's when it's so painful. So it's really important when, and in general anyway, when a person accuses you of doing something, like it's your child, you check, did I do it? And if you didn't, then you realize they've got the problem. So of course it demands this work of self-compassion. It's really important not to use that as a big stick to beat yourself with. This is so important, like what you're saying. And of course to have compassion because you see that they're suffering. And that's the part that's really profound, isn't it? Of course, you're absolutely right.
Yes, it's very hard to detach from your children.
Really,
That's
I know.
one of the strongest
Yes.
attachments, I think.
Yes, exactly. I can only imagine it's the hardest one. I mean, I know with my mum, you know, she had 7 kids, all sorts of typical family, lots of dramas, suffering up and down, dramas, blah, blah, blah. And I know that she thought of every one of us until the day she died. And she was only 71 when she died. I know she had her, and no matter how angry we were all, at some point I was mad as hell at my mother. I'd scream at her, I'd reject her. But I knew she never gave up on me for 1 second. I know that with absolute certainty. I mean, when I think of my mother now, it's like unbearable, you know, when I think of what mothers go through. It's heartbreaking, really. So you've got to be strong. You've got to done the earlier work and know your own self-worth and know what you did do and know what you didn't do. You've got to know this and have certainty, because if you are certain about your own worth and certain what you did and didn't do, then it's less pain for you from coming from the child. But if you've got a lot of see, our biggest attachment in general is this need to be approved of. So if you haven't done the inner work of strengthening your own sense of self in a valid way, you'll get very injured by this insults from you, even if you are a healthy person mentally, it's still painful because there's this bond with children that's unbelievable. You know, I can't imagine it. It's heartbreaking.
I always love hearing, you know, that our children are some of our greatest teachers.
This is the point. Yeah, that's why the
help me.
In the verse, the lesson from this example is, I will see them as my precious guru.
Yeah,
That's the biggest one. Yeah, it's profound.
no, thank
So
you.
yeah, you're very brave being a mother, I tell you. I can't believe it. Amazing. Yes, Mary, talk to me, sweetheart.
Thank you for the teaching tonight, Venerable Robina, and for all the teachings. One of your teachings last year, you talked about listing 100 things that your mother did for you. And I did that. And Venerable Robina, I moved to Cleveland, Ohio. I am in Ohio now.
Oh, are you really?
I'm
So
in
you
your,
finally did go to be with your mum?
I moved in September, and I have 4 sisters and a brother. And
Right.
my mother's 83. My dad's been dead for 15 years, and so I'm here. She needs a lot of help, and I really rejoice that I'm here, and I know where I'm at and what I can handle, and that's why I did make this move. I knew it with a certainty. But what you said tonight about the BMW, I have one sister, Venerable Robina. I am innocent with this, but I have one sister who resents me being here, and it is rough. I need to come up with a gift and take the blame, but it is the other sister and the brother, it's fine, but she's
jealous of your presence. Do you think she's jealous? What do you think? You've got to try and interpret her mind, where she's coming from, as objectively as you can. What do you think it is? Is it an old history with her and you? As kids, you were like this, or what?
Well, I moved away when I was 17, and she's younger than I am, and her kids are now 30 and 25. But I was never here to participate in any of that, and I wasn't here for when my dad was sick, and so she feels like I'm trying to be a hero, and she'll send texts like that, and very hostile texts, and I am and I'm trying to zip it, like you said, zip it. But I think I need to offer a gift and apologize for I think so. This is really, I think it's it really is true. If you can do that, Mary, from the purest part of your heart, to write a letter to her, not an email, write a physical letter, send her a beautiful gift, and you've been thinking about this, and you, over the years being away, and how you've learned to appreciate, say lovely things, and you really appreciate her and her qualities and how kind she's been. And I want to, as heartfelt as you can, and pray and hope that might shift her little heart a little bit, Say really positive words, sincere words, but in a nice letter, not even an email, in a letter, handwritten. Do you understand? And really think about what you're going to say, and say it as kindly and praise her qualities, say good things about her. Do you understand? Do you understand? You know what? I mean, I think you nailed it, because she's a card person. Like, she loves sending cards and things like that. I think she would really appreciate that. And my mom now, think of what it is. So you got to think of, if she's jealous, that means she's exaggerating. So she thinks that you think you're more important than you are, and she must feel a bit inferior. And she probably thinks that so you got to try and anticipate, but just say positive words to her, praise her, thank her, all these things. I mean, as much as you can, sincerely, and then beg her to forgive you for anything you've done wrong and you don't want to harm you. I mean, whatever you like, but not defensive in the tiniest way. No defensiveness. Do you understand? Really just think about it, and then send a beautiful gift and let her read the words carefully. It's up to her, darling. It's up to her. I mean, sibling one is very ancient. Many, many lifetimes of karma between siblings, Do you understand? But no matter what she does, you've got to zip your lip. That's the one. I think I might have mentioned in several teachings. As I said it before, there's 7 of us in our family. We've never had schisms, luckily, between us. We've always, stuck together. Although we all did lots of fighting and dramas. You'd come together for Christmas and a bit too much wine, and people get drunk and say bad things. But we always end up forgiving each other. But I think I've mentioned this many times in the teachings. Maybe the last 20, 25 years, we're all old now, between 70 and 80. The 7 of us. One died. My older sister died. And we've all now, there's this unspoken agreement between us. We never say bad things to each other about the others, which we used to do before, and we never argue when we are together. So what that's done is that has created the space where we even say positive things about each other, which often siblings don't do, but because we created the space to allow virtue and kindness to open up. It's quite strong. It's quite powerful. It's very real teaching. It's been amazing, and it really, really works. So no matter what she does, you never open your mouth. You never talk about her to the other sisters. You never mention it. You just love her until you break her little heart. And as part of your practice, Mary, while you're there, is to help your mum, and as part of your practice while you're there. So remember that, and get the nourishment where you can. Keep friends and everything. Thank you. No, I feel really, it's been amazing the amount of energy I've had just getting things done. And I just wanted to share this because my mom will sometimes say, well, how do I thank you? I said, well, and I got this from you, Venerable Robina. I said, well, how do I thank you for changing all my poopy diapers? I mean,
Oh, that's right. There you go. That's fine.
because I know you said that once too, like all the things your mother has done for you.
That's right. We tend to take our mother for granted. But even if your mum's a mean, self-centered person, she's done hundreds of things, simple things since you were born, Mary, that have facilitated your life. And when we remember those things, like you begin to paint a new picture of your mum, you know, it's very powerful. So you thank her for those simple things, because mothers never expect thanks for changing their, you know, smelly diapers and being kind and wiping your bottom and helping you tie your shoelaces, things, simple things that she knows she's done in her life, the hundreds and hundreds of things that mothers do. So that's so powerful too. It's so powerful, Mary. I'm very happy you made that choice. That's wonderful. Good. Well done, girl. Thank you, darling. Who else then? People. 9 o'clock. 7 o'clock for you. 9 o'clock for me. Yes. Talk to me, people. Anything at all. Any questions? Yes, Vicky, darling, talk to me.
Thank you, Venerable, for this teaching. This is
Good,
wonderful to
good.
see you. My
Good.
older son has rejected me completely, and I saw him just last week because I had to bring him some things of his, like his original birth certificate and things that were important from the safety.
You got another son besides Paul. You're talking not about Paul.
Paul is my younger son, but I have an older son, Neil, who's 40 now.
Okay.
So he's grown up. He's grown up. And so when I brought him these things, I don't have any way to get a hold of him because I don't know he lives in town, but I don't know his address and his phone number or anything like that. And I just respect his wish to separate. So I don't know. I don't think about it too much. But I don't know.
It's not causing you pain.
No, not really. And when I did see him to give him these papers, I was met with such a wall of hate. It was like, I don't even want to really spend any time around him. So I want to know, how do I make him my most beloved guru?
Well, you're doing it already. You see his suffering, right? You can see his suffering, can't you?
Yes, and he is very angry mind, and he has since a little child. So
right,
as growing up,
the basis of your compassion for him is that he's harming himself. Would you agree with that?
Oh yes, and I think when you're so angry, it hurts your heart. I mean, it just physically hurts you. So
of course it does. So the whole business about see them as my precious guru is because he's the object of your practice. So you're obviously practicing well because you don't want, you know, it's not hurting you much. That's very wonderful. Sometimes some mothers can't bear it. So he's your teacher insofar as he's so every time we get criticized, we purify some karma, Vicky. So be happy that by his anger is helping you practice. Getting some humility, you know, you bite your chip, you know, you're taking the blame, in other words. He hates you and blames you, and you're taking the blame. This is marvelous. Don't just take it for granted that you're doing that, but you're doing a marvelous practice. And then you have such compassion for him because he's harming himself. Unbelievable. Having a whole lifetime of being angry is like, not to mention the suffering he's causing himself now, but his future suffering is unbearable. So that's the basis of your incredible compassion for him, isn't it?
yeah, so I guess I just carry on.
Carry on, darling.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you,
Who else,
Venerable.
darling? Okay, sweetheart. So who else has something to say? Ask a question, something to say. Well, we can go to the next two verses. The next verse. What is the next verse? The next verse, I think, is the source of the practice called Tonglen. It says, I will give all my good things, something like give, the giving part. I will give all my good things and my merit to others. And then it says, secretly take upon myself their suffering. So this is the essence of Tonglen. I think this is the source of this practice called Tonglen. And let's discuss that, because this is the culmination of all of these 8 verses. This is the 7th one. The last verse is about seeing everything as illusory, really learning to understand emptiness. But this verse is, so Tonglen, for some reason, it's very popular in the West, and I really don't understand because it's so outrageous. And I think often we misunderstand it. So Tonglen means literally giving, taking. And it's from that verse, I'd say. And so there's a way of doing the practice formally, like on your cushion. And what it is, you'd visualize, let's say, a person in front of you. It could be your son. Vicky could do it. Let's say, give Vicky's example. What's his name? Your boy?
It's Neil.
Neil. Let's say Neil. Let's say Neil is Vicky's object of meditation. So she visualizes Neil in front of her. And then when she does this, and you're using your breath, and Vicky's going to visualize at her heart, like a little rock, which is her self-centeredness and her self-cherishing. And then first she breathes in, and she imagines breathing off Neil into herself like yucky smoke, all Neil's suffering, all his afflictions, not because she wants to get angry, but taking off his pain from him, all the suffering he's suffering, all the anger, all the hurt, all the despair, and all the karma he's creating for himself. She imagines breathing in off him, like as if he's taking it from him and breathing it in happily, taking it into herself, because she wants him to be free of the suffering. So one of the misunderstandings here is, first of all, we think this is a healing technique. No, it's not. There's lots of healing techniques. Vicky can do medicine Buddha for her son. She can do lots of practices to help Neil heal his suffering. But this is a really specific practice for oneself. You're using this person, in Vicky's case, Neil, visualizing his suffering, his pain, and she wants him to be free of it. This is what compassion is. May you be free of suffering. That's the meaning of compassion. But this sort of extra level of it, it's like a kind of bonus level of compassion. She's saying, oh my God, look at Neil's suffering, what he's doing to himself. But then she says, you know what? I would rather have it than him. I would rather have the suffering than him. She doesn't mean she wants to be angry, not like that. But she wants him to be free of the suffering. This is incredible compassion. So she breathes in his suffering, and then she uses that suffering like yucky smoke as she breathes it in, and she imagines it smashes her self-cherishing, loosens the grip of her ego grasping. And then when she breathes out, she visualizes wanting to give him her happiness, her merit, all her goodness, all her virtue, all her good things. She would rather him have those than her. And that's the practice of love. So the practice of compassion, wanting him to be free of suffering, you imagine taking it upon yourself and smashing yourself, cherishing. And then the practice of love, giving him everything that's yours, rather he have it than me. It's a really specific practice, that not just saying, oh, may he not suffer, not just saying, oh, may he be happy, but I'm going to make it happen. And you know what? Give me his suffering. I'd rather have it, and I'd rather give him my happiness and my good health and my money and my wealth and everything else. It's a really intense practice, but in a sense, it's got nothing to do with Neil. It's Vicky using Neil as the grist for her mill to help her develop incredible compassion and incredible love. Are we communicating, people? Good. But it's not a healing practice. People think it's a way to stop Neil's suffering. No, it's not like that at all. It's a very personal practice, a very powerful practice for oneself to increase one's love and increase one's compassion. But this extra level of taking responsibility. In other words, regular compassion is, oh my God, look at that suffering. Vicky thinks of her son suffering, and then she walks away. The next level of compassion actually is great compassion. What can I do to help? That's great compassion, Mahakaruna. But this next one is like the bonus on top. Well, you know what? I'd rather have the suffering than kneel. So it's a very precise practice. Do you understand, Vicky? That's what you can do with it. Luckily, it doesn't hurt you too much, and that's really wonderful. You've got some karma with him that it's not so painful. But you should utilize it as a very powerful way to practice for your sake, to increase your compassion and increase your love. Do you understand? Do you understand, Vicky?
Yes, yes, thank you,
Okay.
Venerable. I have never understood Tonglen that way, and I'm
That's
so
what it is.
happy to have it
I know there's
clear.
That's exactly the
Thank
meaning of it. It's not, we tend to think of it quite differently, but this is the real meaning. It's quite shocking, actually. It's quite outrageous. It's very courageous that you would rather have the suffering than him, and you'd rather have him the happiness. Do you understand?
Yes, thank you so
That's-
much.
It's a powerful practice, Vicky. Okay, good.
Thank you.
All right, darling. So any other questions about that then, about Tonglen? It's a very powerful practice. This is why I think people in the West often misunderstand it. I think it's healing, it's not healing at all. Well, it's healing for itself. It's like putting atomic bombs under delusions. That's the point. And the other thing is people think, oh, well, I might, if I'm breathing in someone's headache, I might get a headache. No, the opposite. The opposite, And this is the really serious level of the great Bodhisattva's practice. This is the culmination of it. It's the result of this is what bodhicitta is, where literally you have learned to rather you suffer. So this is why I always tell this story. Maybe you've heard it from me in the past. Harry, any one of you know Harry and Mary? You know Harry, don't you? He lives in they're both retreating in Colorado, just 2 hours. Where is it, that place? What's it called? That place north of Santa Fe.
They're in Crestone.
Crestone, that's right. And so Harry was a monk long time ago, years and years and years ago. And he and Mary have been together, and they both got caves right up in the mountains. He's a serious meditator. He's been a serious meditator, like really kind of extraordinary. But he's kind of big and fat and got a big beard. He looks like Santa Claus, everybody loves Harry. I know he's 60 now. Everybody loves Harry, and everybody thinks, this is really a special quality. Everybody thinks that they're Harry's best friend because he always just loves everybody, He's amazing, Harry. He's this wonderful fellow, just wonderful and funny and always helps and is just around. People love Harry. Anyway, this is a story back in the 90s, I think. After Lama Yeshe had passed away, he was at Kopan Monastery. And he was maybe in the 80s. And he has a cave up near Lama Zopa's cave. And one day he was going to go there. This must have been before mobile phones, because there was no at the time. So he was packing his pack to go up. He walked up there. Often they'd walk up. It'd take 10 days to walk up the mountain. And he had his pack and everything. And he was about to go. He was leaving to go up to the mountains to meditate. He was at Kopan. And then Lama Zopa said he had a dream that Harry would die. And of course, it can't be a dream because Lama Zopa doesn't sleep. He's just being humble. It's his clairvoyance, right? He can see clearly there was danger that Harry would die going up the mountain. So he asked Geshe Lama Kontrog, this outrageous, amazing holy being, this Lama who lived up in the mountains for years, who lived no sleep, no food, no clothes. He lived in Vajrayogini's Pure Land, Lama Zopa said. He lived at Kopan for many years and he passed away in 2001. Geshe Lama Kontrog. So he was at Kopan at the time. So Lama Zopa, they tried to get a message to Harry, but he'd already left. So Lama Zopa asked Geshe Lama Kontrog to pray for Harry. That was it. So Harry told me the story of what happened. I'd heard about it. I think he was walking up the mountain with one other nun, and she must have told the story. So when I asked him about it, he verified what went on. So what happened was this. He's walking up the mountain. So it's pretty treacherous going up those mountains. We lead this trek up to Lama Zopa's cave, Laudo. We've done 4 already, and it's kind of treacherous. I nearly got knocked over by the yak one time, but never that treacherous. But this particular pass where he was walking, so there'd been like an avalanche, and so one of the normal road was blocked, and they had to take this really treacherous, narrow around the edge of the mountain, and people fall off these mountains. It's quite treacherous. So he's walking up this mountain, and it's suddenly very intense and very close, and there are 4 Sherpas walking down, 4 porters. And these porters, I mean, they're unbelievable. These young guys with wearing their flip-flops up these mountains, you know, and they have this pack like 50, 40, 60 kilos around their head, and they're bent over double. A friend of mine said, all you can do is see your feet, you know. And I know that even just walking up those mountains, you can't afford to look into the sky. You'll fall over the cliff. So you just got to look on your feet, you know, to see where you're going. So these 4 Sherpas coming down very intensely, very quickly, and very dangerous. And so this second, Harry said to himself, he's walking up, he said to himself, 4 of them, 1 of me. Okay, I'll step to the side. So you know from hearing all these Bodhisattva teachings, there's all these kind of techniques that you use to convince ego that it's a load of rubbish, you know, to try and to make this paradigm shift of putting others first. So there's one, I mean, it always sounds hilarious to us to use the logic, well, I'm 1 person and there's 4 people, 4 is more than 1, so they're more important. I mean, what a joke. Ego doesn't think that, you know, of course not. But this is clear. I mean, this is a point too. Even this first point, the thing he just said then, if nothing else even happened, think about this. There's no way in the planet that you would spontaneously have compassion for 4 strangers. If they were your children, maybe, but no. So what he did was he stepped to the side, and he means close to the cliff, to the edge of the cliff, not to the edge of the mountain. He stepped to the side to allow them to pass. Now that's already outrageous. That's already ridiculous. 4 strangers, you know, but automatically without any fuss. So it's obvious you must have done years of retreat. These types of things just don't come out of the blue. You can't just sit at the piano and play Bach. You've practiced for years, and that's the point. He's spent years in his cave doing all these meditations, right? Practicing, becoming a bodhisattva. So his first thought was 4 of them, 1 of me, so I'll step to the side. So he stepped to the edge of the cliff. And the next thought he had, he said, because it was so tight, so intense, if they knock me, I won't hold on. Now that's even more insane, isn't it? No normal person would think that. The instant what we would do, we'd go up against the cliff, the mountain, and hope they don't fall off. And if they fall off, well, it's not my fault, sort of thing. Because that's just instinct of fear, instinct of ego, naturally, you know? So the fact is, they did knock him. They didn't mean to. It's so intense. I mean, you've got to realize how intense these passes are, you know? They did knock him, and he didn't hold on. So he said it was a big drop, you know, 1,000 feet down. And he said, he started to fall with his pack was pulling him, right? His feet were on the mountain and the pack's pulling him, and he's falling like this. And he said, I had a psychic vision of the entire fall. I saw my body crash to the ground. And then he said, as he's falling, I felt the hands of Geshe Lama Kontrog pushing him. So he reversed direction and he fell into the path. Now, the nun was there and she watched it. You can't make that up, you know. So that first of all, his behavior, 4 of them, 1 of me, he must have trained his mind in incredible compassion, and even not holding on, happily giving his life for 4 strangers. And then the miracle, that so-called miracle, but it's not a miracle. This is the power of the great yogis who've become Buddhas. The lowest level bodhisattva can already manifest their body in 100 different bodies simultaneously, can all manifest their mind in 100 different bodies simultaneously. This is the point, you know, in the bodhisattva path. And forget the tantric yogis. So this extraordinary being, this amazing bodhicitta, and the power of the guru, the power of the Buddha, and this supposed so-called miracle, because it's not a miracle, it's a result of karma, you know, that he literally was saved, right? I love that story. That's literally Tonglen. He literally was prepared to give his life for others, you know. I find that story pretty tasty. But 1 step at a time, you know, if you're not ready for that, you can't do it. Any questions? Only time to go. Some question. Stella, you look like you're about to have a question. Are you, darling? Go on. Can't hear you, sweetheart.
First
You
of
better
all,
unmute.
I know Harry, and I always thought I was a good friend of Harry's too,
Oh,
but,
good. There you go. Everybody thinks Harry, we're our best because he's just so kind to everybody. He truly has got equanimity with every human being. It's amazing, isn't it?
he
That's
is.
wonderful stuff.
But I have another question,
Yes.
about I guess it's sort of about Tonglen.
Yeah.
And so I have a nephew who I consider a very dear, he was my first nephew.
Yeah.
When he was little,
Yes.
I bought him everything, I was just crazy about him. Anyway, he's
Yes.
now in his 20s, late 20s, and has a bit of a drinking problem.
Oh,
And
so sad.
he called me up not long ago and told me that I was going to go to hell because I was a Buddhist.
Oh my God, darling. Oh, how unbearable. How sad.
Yeah,
Oh
it-
no.
yeah, it was really, really sad. And I mean, I could tell that he was under the influence. So I just said, I can't talk to you right now because I know that you've been drinking. And so if you want to talk to me later, call me back. And he just
How sad.
kept rambling on, and I hung up. I said, I'm going now. I'm going to hang up. Well, that's been a year. And of course, he's had a lot of bad luck since then. And his brother, his mother and the father and my brother are very Catholic. So I know where that came from,
That's
but
right.
but I don't know if, I mean, I've just let it go because I don't really know how to handle it. I mean, I prayed
Well,
for
there's
him.
nothing to do, darling. He's got his own terrible suffering. He's not even thinking about his own suffering, the alcoholism. But I mean, these viewpoints, he's got this view, and there's nothing on the planet you can do except love him. And he doesn't give you the chance to love him because he doesn't contact you. So, darling girl, it's sad because you probably feel close to him, and it's very sad, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I just continue to pray for him. And I
That's
love
all
these,
you can do. Hmm.
they really
Are you
make me,
close to your brother or not? Are you close to your brother though?
my brother has not touched it at all. He's talked to me a couple of times, but we never ever
Okay.
get into that.
No,
Yeah.
of course. That's right.
So, I mean, and I'm not going to ask him to pick sides or anything like that.
No,
but,
that's right. It's
but,
nothing like
but
that. Of
his
course not.
brother, who is my younger nephew, he has reached out to me, and
Yeah.
he's loving and kind.
That's
but
good.
it's not like my first nephew that I had. So
Oh, that's right.
I'm hoping
Exactly.
one day we can, I don't know, but it makes
That's
me
it.
sad.
His mind's got to be open to be able to talk to you, doesn't it? But if he's so sad and he's an alcoholic anyway, he can't think of anything else but himself, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you for the story about Harry. I'd heard that
Yes.
before, not quite so intense. I
Okay.
love Mary and Harry. They're wonderful people.
Yes, that's true, isn't it? Me too. Wonderful, Stella. Thank you, darling. So much. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So, people, I think we're about done, really. 20 past. I think that story of Harry is the culmination. I think you can't beat that story. So that's the end. So if you have any more questions, or we can just finish a little bit early until we meet again. Yeah, what do you think?
Robina, may we offer you a Thanksgiving mandala?
Let's do that. We'll offer a Thanksgiving mandala to all the Buddhas for the kind teachings. Well, let's do that. Absolutely. Let's do that. Imagine the Buddha happily receiving our wonderful gift of the mandala. Yeah.
Okay. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. May my venerable Lama's lives be firm, its white divine actions spread in the 10 directions. May the torch of the teachings of Losang always remain, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niyatayami.
Wonderful. Let's dedicate. Yeah, good. So let's just say it in English. I'd like to say it in English. So I'll say a bit more words. We think, due to the virtuous karma we've created, just by listening to these teachings of the Buddha, by these virtuous actions of listening to the teachings, may we quickly become a Guru Buddha or a Buddha just like our Lamas, and be able to, just like them, lead all living beings without exception to their own Buddhahood. May that happen as a result of this practice. And then may bodhicitta, the supreme jewel bodhicitta, that has not arisen in the minds of beings, may it arise and grow, and may that which has not arisen in the minds of beings, that has arisen, but may it never diminish, but increase more and more. And may we, in other words, may we never give up practicing all this entire path, renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness. We didn't do the last verse, so maybe that means we have to, next time we meet, we'll do the last verse. Okay, power, yes. So you uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers, honoring the three jewels. Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And what about His Holiness? There we go. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech. May all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. I think I took your job over from you, Eloise. I'm so sorry. You do the rest. Come on. You say the rest. Come on,
Venerable
I'm
One. Venerable One, to use kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers in far off places, especially the West. Mindful of your loving concern for us and intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long.
Wonderful, yeah. That's good. Thank you, dearest people, all of you, so kind, so nice to be together. And then we'll have to do the 8th verse when I come back next time, okay? Yes?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, John. Thank you, Eloise. Thank you, everybody. Much love, darlings. Bye.